The time is exactly 8:54 a.m. South African time. We cross over to the UK. We'll be talking with dietitian and PhD in public health and a PhD in public health candidate at the University of the Western Cape. But of course, she is currently in the UK. Our guest, obviously, is the lovely Katie. Katie Pereira-Kotze. I just lost your name there for a minute, Katie. Welcome to the program. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thanks very
And
much for having me, Julie.
you are here
Morning.
to talk about something really important, aren't you? Just before we get into the heart of the matter, do you live permanently in the UK? And are you
Yeah, I relocated a few years ago, but I'm still completing my PhD through the University of the Western Cape. And all of my
right?
work and research is focused on South Africa, which in the last 2 years, because of the pandemic and lockdown and everybody moving virtually, it's been okay for me to actually continue working from a distance.
Absolutely. With technology, being where it is, anything and everything's possible these days, is it not? Isn't it absolutely marvelous?
It is amazing, yeah. And I'm especially happy about that because I've spent most of my life and working career in South Africa. So it's great to still be able to be involved, even though I needed to move for personal reasons. So,
Absolutely. But you sound South African through and through.
yes,
Okay,
definitely.
welcome. Lovely talking with you. And it's about a very important, and I'm quite saddened, reading this because you kind of realize just how marginalized the majority of the working class people are in South Africa, particularly the domestic workers who make up about 12% of working women in South Africa, yet they're not provided with enough maternity leave or compensation. So they are caught up in this conundrum. I either leave my infant baby at the most tender age and stage of his or her life and go back to work because I need to feed this child. Or they decide to bond with this child and spend some quality time with the child, but then they don't have enough money to put food on the table. So they are in a very, very difficult situation.
Yes, definitely. And we have laws and policies in South Africa to protect women. So we've got the Basic Conditions of Employment Act that says that all women should get 17 weeks or 4 months of maternity leave around the time of childbirth. But the challenge is at the moment, it's not mandatory for that time to be paid. And there is a national mechanism whereby people should be able to access payment while they're on maternity leave, and that is our national social insurance scheme, the Unemployment Insurance Fund. And it is something that a group like domestic workers are eligible to contribute to, but there are a number of challenges that the employers and employees or workers face with the UIF. So firstly, it depends on the employer. So the domestic worker's employer needs to actually register the domestic worker, make the contributions, and many employers that I've spoken to really struggle with that and say that it takes quite a lot of time. Somebody who employs a domestic worker doesn't always consider themselves an employer. They are looking for somebody to help with them, to help around the house because they're too busy to do those kinds of things. They're not up to date on the latest human resources and labor laws in the country. So it's challenging in that regard. And then also many women who claim from the UIF experience delays in getting their payments. And so many only receive their claims months after they've delivered their baby. And by that time, they've run out of money, they've gone back to work. And what I'm particularly interested in is women trying to carry on breastfeeding, which is challenging when women work as it is. But the earlier women go back to work, the less likely it is that they'll carry on breastfeeding. So there's many
And
challenges. It's quite a complex situation.
Katie, the sad reality in South Africa, is you and I are aware of, is once your domestic worker has a baby, invariably, because of all of the challenges you've just raised now, they leave the babies back home in the rural areas with gogo to
Yeah.
take care of them. And
Yes.
they're fortunate, they'd be lucky to even get to see that baby once in a month
Yeah.
because domestic workers don't earn huge amounts of money,
Yeah.
and they then need to send money back home for gogo to look after the grandchild, and then possibly only go twice or three times a year if they're
Mm.
fortunate enough to do so. So that bonding with mother and child is also deprived of, this family, this mother and child union, are robbed of that beautiful bonding, time, where they be 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
That being said, coming back to UIF, I had a helper that was with me for very many years, and I had actually taken the trouble to, get all of that done. When she eventually left me, she was beyond childbearing age, but when she eventually left me, she did, manage to go away with a tidy sum of money.
Yeah.
So here, do we put the blame at the door of government, the Department of Labor, or are we also, as employers, responsible for not driving this issue hard enough?
Yeah. And that's a really good question that you've raised. And I like the example that you've given, that that was a situation where it did actually work. So the Unemployment Insurance Fund is meant to cover and provide income for when people are not working for many reasons. So like you mentioned, either a retrenchment or stopping working, but maternity is one of those reasons. Extended sick leave is another reason. And there are times when it can work. And if you don't mind, I'm going to turn the question back onto you. How did you know about the UIF for your domestic worker?
Because
How
I
did you
was
know? Yeah.
I was in the corporate world for a very, very long time. So
Okay.
I was, afraid with all of these issues.
Yeah.
I also worked in the HR department at a large corporate. So I
Yeah.
was aware of all of this, and I tried to do right by
Yeah.
my domestic helper. And when she eventually retired, she was pretty content with, the payout she got. And I did tell her upfront that this is what I'm doing for you, because I had to take her with me when I went to have her registered.
Yeah.
It was a bit of an inconvenience, but when you think about the role they play in your life, I mean, she was a member of my family eventually. She worked for me
Yeah.
for about 16 years. I trusted her with my children. I trusted her with my home.
Yeah.
And I was devastated when she left. I was crying crocodile tears when she left. And it felt like my mom was leaving me. So,
Yeah.
and I think the majority of South African householders have a similar relationship with their domestic workers. So
Definitely.
why on earth do they not do right by them by signing them up for UIF?
Yeah, and I can just say well done to you for what you did and made sure that that was done. And it is something that, as I mentioned just now, people who employ a domestic worker don't always consider themselves employers. But you are, I mean, that you are paying somebody, you are you're allocating that money, you're prioritizing needing to have somebody working in your house. Employers need to then take it a step further and they have the responsibility to facilitate the contribution. And it's not a huge amount. It's 1% from the employer, 1% from the worker. So it doesn't amount to a huge amount every month, but the reward or the return that that person will then get to be able to have some income replacement, because a domestic worker employer often cannot afford to pay her domestic worker 4 months of maternity leave and then also pay a replacement while she's on maternity leave. But the UIF provides a solution for that by giving income replacement. And there are organizations that can help employers. So there are domestic worker unions, SADSAWU or DWOSA and the ISWI Domestic Worker Alliance. There are also some employer associations that assist employers with facilitating these things. And then there's also some companies that charge a small fee and they assist employers with facilitating maternity claims. So the name of one is Street Dreams. There's another called, I'll get the names for you and share them with you. UIF Hero is the other one. Some are based in different areas in South Africa, but people can Google UIF payment companies, and they are up to date with the latest laws and regulations and help employers with all stages of the registration, contribution, and claiming process. And you were asking just now who is to blame. I think everybody needs to take a bit of responsibility. So employers, these associations that assist, but also obviously the Department of Employment and Labor has a big role to play here. And some of the research that I've been doing has unveiled some of the inefficiencies and challenges and barriers in all government departments there are delays in certain processes. And there's definitely a lot that could be done to improve how a system and a scheme like the UIF works.
Katie, this issue is a long-standing issue. I mean, with the new dispensation, talking almost 30 years ago, this was one of the issues that was on government's agenda. Almost 30 years later, we still have not made any headway.
Yeah.
And also, when we look at the international labor organizations, they offer a a definition of a comprehensive maternity protection. It includes health protection at the workplace and a period of maternity leave. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know,
Yeah.
we can use, we could just replicate those type of laws that's working well in other countries and just streamline it to work well here in South Africa. Why is there dragging of heels on this issue, not withstanding something else that has come up in South Africa? And I'm sure you're well aware of it, seeing that you're so, entrenched in this particular issue, and that is the minimum wage for domestic workers. That's
Yeah.
another thorn in the sides of these really overworked, underpaid people in our communities.
Definitely. And as you mentioned, there's so many issues. Minimum wage is a really big thing. And I mean, if when people look at the basic minimum wage in South Africa, it's actually quite low. So, I mean, and when I've spoken to domestic workers, many domestic workers are using more than half of their salary just to pay for their transport to get to work and
Absolutely.
back. I think
Mm.
employers sometimes forget how much that costs. Often domestic workers need to take either a taxi and a bus or two taxis. They need to get to a central taxi rank and then get to the employer's household. And then those who have had babies are then needing to pay for childcare for their children to be looked after while they are working. You mentioned the definition of comprehensive maternity protection, and I've been considering that as well because it's not just maternity leave and payment during maternity leave. There are certain things that, especially for a domestic worker, employers could implement and it wouldn't cost them anything more. And I think this is one of the barriers. People think, oh, it's going to cost me a lot of money to do paid maternity leave. But as we've mentioned, the UIF is one mechanism where it wouldn't have to cost the employer a huge amount. Other aspects of comprehensive maternity protection are, as you mentioned, health protection at the workplace is making sure that pregnant and breastfeeding women don't need to do any tasks that might be physically demanding to them. The purpose of maternity protection is also to protect women when they're pregnant and then recovering from childbirth, and to allow them this time to bond with their baby and to establish breastfeeding as well. So another component of maternity protection is allowing breastfeeding or expressing of breast milk breaks when women return to work. And there is the Basic Conditions of Employment Act has a code of good practice that recommends that women are entitled to 2 half-an-hour breaks when they return to work up until the child is 6 months old, so that they have time, if they're not close enough to the baby, to at least express their breast milk. And many people that I've spoken to have never even heard about this in many work settings, let alone for domestic workers. And other components of maternity protection are non-discrimination due to pregnancy and childbirth, job security. So many women fear losing their jobs when they've become pregnant and when they need to go on a period of maternity leave. And then also being entitled to go to the antenatal and postnatal checkup visits at the clinic to ensure that their health and the health of their child is good. So many people are not aware of all of these components, and there are definitely parts of them that can be done without a huge amount of cost or inconvenience to employers and workplaces.
Katie, I could talk to you for hours on end. Unfortunately, our time is up. I'm even late for the news, which was meant to be
Sorry.
going out at 9 o'clock. Not your fault. It's not your fault at all. But lovely talking to you. I think we'll talk with you again in a couple of months' time just to see if there have been any further developments and if, by way of this program, we can speed it up in any way. Katie Pereira-Kotze, thank you indeed for being with us on the show. Go well. God bless.
Thank you for having me. All the best.
The time is exactly 8:08, and Zai Jadwin is standing by with the news on the hour. Please do stay with us. A lot more coming your way on the show this morning.